This is a kind of tough gospel passage. It's hard to hear Jesus say these things that seem ungenerous, unkind, uncompassionate, when normally we feel like Jesus would be too understanding maybe. Of course you should go and be with your family while your father is dead. Don't just take a day off, have a week. We expect out of Jesus this boundless pool of compassion, and yet we are confronted with these tough, kind of strident words. I think it is best to look not just at this gospel passage, but also at the other readings we receive for some clues about how to understand it fully. And this week, as I was reading all of it, I kept having my thoughts dragged back to this one seemingly unrelated topic, but I promise you I will tie it in, and that is, why don't Americans like soccer all that much? You see, there's a thing about the rules of soccer. Soccer runs on a continuous clock, 45 minutes to a half, and from the moment they start the clock, they run it all the way through. But that's not the only thing that's happening with the clock. You see, there's a ref whose job it is to keep the amount of time that the game's not being played. So when the ball goes out of bounds and somebody has to go get it and they bring it over and throw it in, the clock you see keeps running, but there's a goal or there's a ref who's keeping that time. And over the whole course of that 45 minutes, it might add up to 2 or 3 minutes of what they call stoppage time. And where in an American sport you get to the end of the clock, the end of 45 minutes and the game would stop, in soccer they add on that stoppage time. But again, where we would go, okay, they're going to add 2 or 3 minutes. That makes sense. In soccer, they add about 2 or 3 minutes. Because even then it doesn't pop up there. They just say they're adding a couple of minutes. And then the ref feels out, when does the game feel like it's at a stopping point? If it gets right to 3 minutes and one team is building up, well, they might let it go a little longer. If nothing's happening and it's a little short of 3 minutes, they might say, well, let's go ahead and call it here. It's insane, right? If you think about what are the most popular American sports, the most two popular are football and basketball, and in both of those, the clock is like a third participant in the game. How many halves of football have you watched, the second half of a football game, where they say, now clock management is the issue? Are they going to run the ball and make the clock go faster? Are they going to pass it a lot and try to slow it down? Are they going to have a hurry-up offense? Are they going to slow it down the tempo? In basketball, I haven't watched a game of basketball in the last 30 years that hasn't ended with the last 2 minutes taking 4.5 hours because they keep fouling each other. The clock matters. Every moment matters. It's what makes sports so great to us, and so it makes us crazy when in soccer it seems like it doesn't. Every moment matters. There, I think, is the core of what Jesus is trying to get at in this gospel passage. But first, let's look at Galatians. I love this bit, and I like that how Paul starts it. Christ for freedom has set you free, so that you will not be a slave anymore. Do not submit yourself to a new yoke of slavery. And then he follows that up immediately by saying, don't let your freedom lead to self-indulgence. Rather, immediately become slaves to each other. Paul here is talking about the slavery we all existed in before Christ came, a slavery of death and sin, a slavery tied to a world that lives by different rules than those that God intends for us, a slavery of a life dedicated to our own self-focus and self-reflection, rather than a life that looks outwards. And Paul says, don't slip back into that old slavery. Now that Jesus has won your freedom, don't let yourself fall back into the trap of being focused on yourself or on your sin or let death control you, but rather live in this free new life and instead bind yourself with chains of affection to each other. Become slaves to one another. Live this life of Christianity bound together forever. In every instant. Because every moment matters. Jesus, in this passage, I think, is not telling his people that it is wrong somehow to care about their dead relatives, or that it is wrong to want and go say goodbye to somebody, but it's the moment that they're doing it that is important. In Luke's gospel, this is the moment when the feature and the focus turns from his ministry in Galilee off to the distant city of Jerusalem. When Jesus goes from being this itinerant preacher wandering around talking about a new way of life towards setting his foot on the first steps that will lead him inexorably to being the Messiah. This is the moment where he goes from a guy who's a pretty good time to hang out with, who can make water into wine and is doing all these miracles and is saving them from storms on the sea. This guy who called all of these people out of ordinary humdrum lives and who has taught them and raised them up, he transforms from that into a guy who's going to get them all killed because he just won't be quiet when it would be safer to be. And all of a sudden, some of the people walking around with him go, "Oh, well, I do need to go make sure my father gets buried. And it really would be great if I could take a little time to go say goodbye to people." Jesus' point here is not that we do not have time for compassion. His point is that you can't be half in and half out. That if you're going to take on this title of his follower, if we are going to call ourselves Christians, then it means that every moment matters. We don't get to sometimes wear the mantle and other times not. Our Old Testament story shows us the power of taking on a title or a role or a belief. Elijah has spent his life being the prophet of God, and he's got a bunch of guys who follow him around who are kind of sub-prophets but aren't the big prophet. Elisha is one of those guys, and here at the end of Elijah's life, he gets assumed up into heaven, rides up in a chariot of fire, and he leaves behind his mantle, a symbol of the role he is leaving behind, of the position and power and authority he is leaving behind. And Elisha picks it up. And for a moment we see, it seems like he wonders, is this for me? Does this mean anything? Now that Elijah is gone, has God gone with him? And he says, "Where is the God of Elijah?" And he strikes the sea with the mantle and the sea parts. God saying, "No. As I walked with Elijah, now I walk with you." And Elisha puts on the mantle and becomes the prophet of God. It is all too easy, I think, for us to think that there are those times when we are Christians and followers of Christ, and there are those times when we are not. That there are times when I am Chris and I'm called to do gospel work and be a gospel person, and then there are times when I'm called to be a ruthless capitalist, or times when I'm called to be focused on my family, or times when I'm called to live my life in accordance with the rules of whatever little game we are societally playing. But the truth is, every moment matters. And if we are going to be like Elisha and pick up the mantle of Christ follower and drape it on our shoulders, we have to recognize that in that moment we become slaves to each other and slaves to God. That if we accept truly in our lives the presence of Christ, then it will wrap around us and through us, and it will transform us into different people living by a different code and a different standard. That every moment of our lives, when we go to bury our father, or go to say goodbye to those we love, or when we turn our feet toward Jerusalem, that every one of those moments will be colored and tinged and marked with the truth that God is with us, and more importantly, that we are with God. Every moment matters, Jesus cries out to his disciples, because from now on, every moment, your job is to build the kingdom. Amen.